10 years to the day, my wife stood up in a room of 22 people and raised her glass to me. To the one man who never doubted me. Everyone drank. So did I. Because at 6 that morning, restoring the old photos I'd meant to give her, I opened a folder she'd sworn no one would ever find. I read it twice. Then I knotted my tie and drove us both to dinner. She glowed through every word of that toast, squeezed my hand on the word trust. I set my fork down before she finished. And I did the one thing she'd bet our whole marriage I'd never have the nerve to do. The room thought it was romantic. 2 people at that table stopped breathing. They knew what I'd found. They just didn't know I had. I'm Grant. I'm 34, and for 10 years, I was the safe one, the man everybody trusted and nobody ever thought to watch. Let me take you back to that morning, because the folder wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time I let myself look. We lived in a brick colonial outside Asheville, the kind of street where people wave and mean it. I'm a structural engineer. I spend my days making sure things hold. Beams, loads, the quiet math under a floor that keeps a family standing on it without ever thinking about why. That's the joke my wife used to make at parties. Grant makes sure nothing falls down, she'd say, and everyone would laugh. And I'd smile because I liked being the man who kept things up. Camille was the one they came for, though. My wife could walk into a room and rearrange the temperature of it. She ran an interior staging business. Empty houses she filled with the illusion of a life so they'd sell faster. She was good at it. She could make a stranger believe a house was a home in an afternoon. I used to think that was a gift. I know now it was a warning I chose to read as charm. That morning was supposed to be simple, our 10th anniversary. I'd woken at 5:30 before her, before our daughter, and crept down to the office off the kitchen. For weeks, I'd been secretly pulling every photo we'd ever taken into one slideshow. 10 years, front to back, set to the song from our first dance. It was going to play on the TV at dinner while everyone we loved watched us be us. That was the surprise. That was the whole plan. The old files were scattered across 3 dead phones and a backup drive Camille had stopped using years ago. I plugged the drive in and let it load. Photos poured in, beaches, the hospital the day Josie was born, 100 ordinary Sundays, and then a folder that wasn't photos at all. No name on it, just a date range 4 years wide. I almost skipped it. I want you to understand. I almost closed the laptop and went to make coffee and never knew. My whole life balanced on whether I clicked one gray folder at 6 in the morning. That's the part that still keeps me up. I clicked it, and the floor I'd spent 10 years making sure would hold, it didn't. I'm not going to tell you yet what was in that folder, not because I'm teasing you, because I need you to sit in the exact chair I sat in, knowing something enormous had just walked into the room and not letting my face show it. Josie's footsteps hit the stairs. My daughter, 5 years old, hair a disaster, dragging the blanket she'd had since birth. "Daddy, is it the party day?" I closed the laptop. "It's the party day," I said. And I made her toast and cut it into triangles the way she likes. And I did not shake. Not once. I want you to remember that, because everyone in this story bet their whole hand on the idea that I couldn't hold steady. They were about to find out what an engineer does with a load he wasn't warned about. If you've ever had to keep your voice level while your entire life quietly caved in behind your eyes, you already know how this feels. Before I go further, if this is already sitting heavy in your chest, take a second to like this video and subscribe, because stories like mine travel on people like you. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I read every one of them late when the house is quiet. Now let me get back to that kitchen, because the morning was only the beginning of what I found. Here's what I did after Josie went to brush her teeth. I opened the folder again, and I read like an engineer reads a failure report. No panic. Facts first. There were receipts. Hotel folios, a dozen of them, spread across 3 years, every one for a room in a city Camille had told me was a work trip. There were confirmation emails forwarded to an account I'd never seen her use. And there were messages. Exported, saved, kept, because my wife saved everything. The way some people can't throw away a thing that once mattered. They were between Camille and a man named Paul. Paul Marlowe. I knew Paul. Paul had carved the turkey at our table 2 Thanksgivings ago. Paul's wife, Rachel, was Camille's best friend in the world. Maid of honor, godmother to our daughter, the woman Camille called every single night. Paul and Rachel were on the guest list for that evening's dinner. They were coming to celebrate 10 years of my marriage. 3 of those years my wife had been spending in hotel rooms with the husband of her best friend. I sat very still. Outside, a garbage truck did its rounds. Somewhere upstairs, Josie was singing to herself. And I did the math the way I always do because numbers don't lie and people do. The affair started the spring of our 3rd year. It ran on and off for about 3 years. And in the middle of that window, right in the middle, our daughter was born. I need you to understand what that arithmetic does to a man at 6 in the morning. It doesn't make you cry. It makes you cold. It makes the whole room go quiet and sharp, like the second before a beam gives. Because the question that arrived in my kitchen wasn't only, did my wife betray me? That question I could survive. The question underneath it, the one with my daughter's face on it, that one I couldn't breathe around. I closed the laptop again. I went upstairs. I stood in the doorway of Josie's room and watched her try to braid her own hair and fail and laugh about it. She had a crayon drawing taped to her wall, the one she'd made at school, 3 stick figures under a yellow sun. My wall family, it said, spelling optional. A tall one, a medium one, a small one holding both their hands. I had never in my life wanted to hold something so badly and been so afraid to. Daddy, are you crying? No, Bug, I said. I got soap in my eye. She accepted that because 5-year-olds accept everything from the people who make their toast into triangles. And I decided, standing in that doorway, that whatever I did next, she would not feel 1 gram of it. Not that day. Not ever, if I could help it. Whatever was coming, my daughter was going to keep her whole family and her yellow sun for as long as I could hold the sky up. That was the first decision. It turned out to be the one that kept me human through everything after. Now, I could have detonated right there. Woken Camille, thrown the laptop on the bed, screamed until the neighbors came. A lot of men would have. Maybe most. And I'll be honest with you, part of me wanted to. There's a version of me that never opened that folder quietly. But I've spent my whole career learning one thing about a structure under sudden stress. You do not react to the first reading. You gather the load path. You find out exactly what is carrying what and where it fails before you touch a single bolt. So I made a second decision. I was going to go to that dinner. I was going to smile for the photos. And I was going to spend the day being exactly the man they all thought I was. The safe one, the trusting one, the one who never checks. While I quietly found out how deep it went. Because here's the thing about being the man nobody watches. Nobody watches you. I got Josie to school. I came home. Camille was up by then, in her robe, coffee in both hands, already lit up about the evening. 10 years, she said, and kissed my cheek. Can you believe it? I really can't, I said. She didn't hear the second meaning. Why would she? She'd never once in 10 years had to. She spent that morning on the phone with the florist, the restaurant, with Rachel. I heard her laughing in the other room, that easy laugh, telling her best friend how lucky she was. He has no idea what I've got planned, she said. And I stood in the hallway holding a coffee going cold in my hand, thinking, neither do you. I want to tell you about the folder one more time, and then I'll leave it, because it matters that you understand it wasn't a diary or a hunch. It was proof, kept by the person it damned. My wife had documented her own affair without meaning to, the way she documented everything. And then she told a man at a Christmas party. I found this too buried in the messages, that I was too decent to go looking. He's too decent to go looking. That line, I read it maybe 40 times that morning. She wasn't wrong about the decent part. She was wrong about what decent men do when they finally look. Pause with me here for a second. If you'd found that folder at 6 in the morning, with the party 12 hours away and your kid singing upstairs, what would you have done? Blown it up or held it? For years, I would have sworn I was the blow-it-up type. I wasn't. And what I did with the holding is the whole rest of this story. Let me back up, though, because to understand why the affair cut the way it did, you have to understand what Camille was to me before it, and what I was to her, which turned out to be 2 very different things. We met when I was 23. She was 22, waiting tables to fund a design certificate, and I was a junior engineer who came into her diner every day for a month before I worked up the nerve to say more than just coffee. She was the first person who made me feel like being steady was a quality instead of a limitation. My whole life, I'd been the reliable kid, the one teachers trusted with the keys, the one friends called for a ride at 2 a.m. and forgot to invite to the party at 10, the dependable one. Never the one anyone crossed a room for. Camille crossed the room. That's what I thought anyway. She looked at the quiet guy in the corner booth and picked him. Do you know what that does to a man who spent 23 years being the safe option? It rebuilt me. I would have laid down in traffic for her. I nearly did in 100 small, daily ways for 10 years. We married the summer I turned 24. Small wedding, her sister Adrienne as maid of honor, before Rachel took that spot years later, my sister Wren crying in the front row. I proposed at the little Italian place downtown, on the patio, and there's a photo of that exact moment. Camille's hands over her mouth, me on one knee, the string lights blurred behind us. That photo was going to be the last slide in the slideshow, the one everyone would applaud. I'd built the whole 10-year story around the idea that she chose me, and in the folder, in a message to Paul from year 4, I found what she actually thought she'd chosen. Grant is the life, she wrote. You're the living. The life. Not the love. The life. The house that holds up. The man who makes the toast into triangles. The floor she stood on so she could reach for something else. I read that on the anniversary of the day I married her, and I understood, finally, the exact shape of the wound I'd been carrying since I was a kid without knowing its name. I wasn't afraid of being left. I was afraid of being useful. Afraid that the most anyone would ever feel for me was gratitude. That I'd be trusted, relied on, thanked, and never, not once, be the person someone couldn't live without. Camille hadn't just cheated. She'd confirmed the thing I was most afraid was true. But here's what she got wrong. And it's the same thing they all got wrong. She thought a man that afraid of being nothing but useful would do anything to keep the arrangement. Grovel. Forgive. Pretend. She bet 10 years that if I ever found out, I'd swallow it to keep my family and my floor and my triangles. She had no idea that the same fear can go the other way. That a man can decide in one cold morning that being useful to someone who despises him is worse than being alone. She'd find that out, but not yet. First, I had a dinner to smile through. The restaurant was the same one where I'd proposed. Camille had booked it on purpose. The patio, the string lights, the whole callback. 22 guests, both families. The Marlows, Adrienne, Camille's mother, Diane, who had never fully approved of me and never fully hidden it. Wren, my sister, the only person in that room whose love for me had never once come with a receipt. I walked in carrying a folder of my own, not the evidence. That stayed home, backed up in 3 places by then, because I'm an engineer and I don't trust a single point of failure. The folder I carried was the slideshow, on a drive, ready to plug into their AV system. 10 years of photographs. I'd decided that morning to play it anyway. You might think that's strange. Why give the woman who gutted you a beautiful gift in front of everyone she'd deceived? Because I wanted to see it. All of it. 10 years of a marriage, front to back, on a big screen, in a room that held both the people who'd known and the people who'd been lied to right alongside me. I wanted to sit in that and watch her watch it. I wanted to know what her face did. And I wanted one clean, honest record of what we'd been before I told the truth about what we were. Paul shook my hand at the door, firm grip, looked me right in the eye. 10 years, man, that's the whole ball game. It really is, I said. Rachel hugged me, warm, uncomplicated, godmother to my kid, best friend to my wife, and completely unaware that the man whose hand I'd just shaken had spent 3 years in hotel rooms with the woman she trusted most. I hugged her back and felt something I hadn't expected to feel that whole day. Not rage, grief. For her. Because I already knew that before this was over, Rachel Marlowe was going to lose more than I was, and she'd never seen it coming either. Hold that thought about Rachel. She matters more than anyone at that table yet, and she doesn't know it. We sat. Wine was poured. Camille was radiant, moving from guest to guest, refilling the room's warmth like she refilled empty houses. Twice she came back to my side and put her hand on my shoulder and called me my Grant to whoever she was charming. My Grant. The possessive I'd once loved. It landed different now. You don't say my chair about a thing you respect. You say it about a thing you own. Adrienne watched me across the table. Camille's sister, I'd always thought she just didn't like me much. Too quiet for her taste, not enough flash. That night, catching her eyes, I understood there was more to it. She kept glancing between me and Camille with a little wary alertness. The way you watch a smoke detector you know you disabled. I filed that away. I'd learn later exactly why Adrian was nervous. She'd been the alibi. Every girls' weekend that was really a hotel, Adrian had covered. My sister-in-law had lied to my face for years at holidays, over the heads of our children, and thought it was loyalty. The salads came. The toast started. Camille's mother went first. A stiff little speech about commitment that managed to compliment her daughter and faintly indict me in the same breath. Then Wren, my sister, said something simple and true about how she'd never seen me happier than the day Josie was born, and I had to look at my plate for that one because she didn't know what the word Josie was doing to me right then. And then Camille stood. She tapped her glass. The patio went quiet. String lights, warm faces, the same spot where I'd knelt 10 years before. She looked around the room like she owned every heart in it. And then she looked at me, and her eyes actually shone. And I realized something that I think is the cruelest part of this whole story. She believed it. In that moment toasting me, my wife genuinely believed she loved me. That's the thing people don't tell you about betrayal. The good ones can mean the toast and mean the lie in the same breath and never feel the contradiction because they've built a room in themselves where the two never have to meet. She could stand there, 3 years of hotel rooms behind her, the man in them sitting 8 feet away, and raise a glass to my trust with a whole heart. 10 years ago, she said, a very serious young man in a corner booth finally asked me to dinner. Laughter. And in 10 years, he has never once made me feel anything but safe. He has never doubted me, not for a single day. Her voice caught, real emotion, and the room went soft and wet-eyed. To the one man who never doubted me. Glasses up. Everyone drank. I drank too. And here is the moment. This is the one she bet 10 years I'd never have the nerve to take. I set my fork down. I stood up. I picked up the little remote for the AV system, the one I'd set by my plate, and I pressed play. And the screen behind her lit up with 10 years of us. The beach, the hospital, 100 Sundays, set to the song from our first dance, exactly as I'd planned it weeks ago, when I still thought this was going to be the happiest night of my life. The room turned to watch. Camille turned too, her hand flying to her mouth. That same gesture from the proposal photo, delighted, undone. "Grant," she breathed, "you made this?" "I made this," I said, and I let it play. All of it. Every warm slide. I let the whole room fall in love with my marriage one more time. I watched Rachel wipe her eyes. I watched Diane, my mother-in-law, soften for the first time in a decade. I watched Paul Marlowe smile at photographs of a family he'd spent 3 years quietly dismantling. I let it run right up to the last slide. The proposal, the patio, the string lights, Camille's hands over her mouth. And then, before the applause could start, while every eye in that room was full and shining and turned toward the two of us, I lifted my own glass. "I have one too," I said. "A toast." I'm going to stop there for one breath, because what I said next is the hinge of my whole life, and I don't want to rush it. You want to know the funny thing? 6 months earlier, I'd have told you I was incapable of what I did in the next 60 seconds, that I'd fold, that the fear of losing my family would make me eat any amount of lie. Camille thought so too. She was counting on it. Everyone who ever met me would have bet on it. They were all working from the old blueprint. None of them had recalculated the load. Let me tell you how the room got so quiet you could hear the string lights hum. I raised my glass to my wife and I smiled and I said, "Camille, thank you. That was a beautiful toast. You always did know how to make a room believe something." A few people chuckled, unsure. "You said I never doubted you." And you're right. 10 years I never doubted you once. Not on the work trips, not on the girls' weekends, not when you told me money was tight and then it wasn't. And I never asked why. I kept my voice easy, warm even, an engineer describing a floor plan. I trusted you completely, and I need you to hear me say this in front of everyone who loves us, because it's the truest thing I know about myself. I looked right at her. That was the whole problem. The patio didn't understand yet, but 2 people did. Paul Marlowe set his glass down very carefully, like it had suddenly gotten heavy. And across the table, Adrian had gone the specific gray of a person watching a door open that she'd spent years leaning against. Camille's smile was still up, but it had stopped meaning anything. "Grant," she said, half a laugh. "What are you—" "I'm making a toast," I said. "To trust. and to the people in this room who spent a long time betting I'd never stop giving mine away. And then I did the thing. I took off my wedding ring, and I set it down on the table next to my untouched fork, and I said quietly to my wife of 10 years, "Happy anniversary. I found the folder this morning." I didn't shout. I didn't name Paul. I didn't turn Rachel's whole life to ash in front of her at a dinner party. That wasn't mine to do that way. Not to her. Not there. I said 7 words that only the guilty could translate, and I watched them land on exactly the 3 people who could read them. Camille's face didn't crumble. That's not how the strong ones break. It emptied. Everything that had been performing warmth 10 seconds ago just switched off, and for 1 second, before she could rebuild it, I saw the actual person underneath doing frantic arithmetic. What does he know? How much? Who else? I think, I said to the confused, lovely, half-drunk room full of people who loved us, that Camille and I have some things to talk about at home. Thank you all for coming. It really was a beautiful 10 years. I looked at the frozen proposal photo still glowing on the screen. Most of it. And I walked out. That's the one thing she bet I'd never do. Not scream, not throw a plate. Walk. Stand up in the exact place I'd once knelt, and choose to stop kneeling, in front of everyone, without giving her a single scene to spin. I made it to the parking lot before my hands started shaking. I want to be honest with you about that, because I've made it sound very controlled, and it was, right up until it wasn't. I got to my truck, and I gripped the wheel, and I shook, hard for about 90 seconds, in the dark, where no one could give me that look. The look that says poor Grant, so trusting, never saw it coming. I saw it coming. I just took my time. Then I drove home, relieved the babysitter, paid her too much, and went and stood in my daughter's doorway again and watched her sleep under her yellow sun. And the second decision came back around, harder than before, because walking out of that restaurant was the easy part. The affair, I could leave. But the folder had a second question in it, the one with Josie's birthday in the middle of it. And standing in her doorway that night, I knew that before I could rebuild anything, I had to know the answer. And I was terrified of it. I'm going to tell you what I did next, but first I have to tell you about the 6 weeks before that morning, because the truth is the folder didn't ambush me completely. Something had already started pulling at a loose thread. I'd been ignoring it, the way you ignore a hairline crack because naming it means admitting the wall might come down. It started at a barbecue in late spring. We were at the Marlowes, actually. Their backyard, a dozen couples, kids running through a sprinkler. I went inside to get more ice, and I heard Rachel and Camille in the kitchen, not fighting exactly, but tight. Rachel's voice low and hurt. "You'd tell me," she was saying. "If there was ever anything, you'd tell me." And Camille, smooth as always, "Rachel, there's nothing. You're spiraling again." I came in for the ice, and they both smiled at me like nothing. And Rachel's smile was the saddest thing I'd seen in months, and I told myself it was between the two of them. But it stuck, the way a wrong number sticks. A week later, Camille left her phone on the counter, face up, and a message came in from a contact, saved only as staging vendor, do not delete, just a name any spouse would scroll past. The preview said, can't stop thinking about Charleston. We didn't have a staging job in Charleston. I knew that because I did our taxes. I stood there and I did the thing I'm least proud of and most grateful for. I didn't confront her. I didn't even pick up the phone. I just started, quietly, to look. If you've ever felt that crack open in your own house, that first small wrong thing you couldn't unsee, you know the loneliness of it. You're suddenly living in a different marriage than the one your wife thinks you're both in, and you can't tell a soul, because what if you're wrong? And what if you're right? Real quick. Because a lot of you are living some version of this right now. What's the smallest thing that ever made you finally look? Put it in the comments. Not to shame anyone, just so the next person scrolling knows they're not crazy and they're not alone. Then stay with me, because the looking is where the whole thing turned. Here's how a structural engineer investigates his own marriage. Carefully, non-destructively. You don't rip out the wall to see if it's rotten. You look for the load path. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't plant anything, and I want to be clear about that, because there's a version of this story where the husband becomes something ugly, and I promised my daughter's yellow son I wouldn't. I just paid attention to the things that were already mine to see. Our joint accounts, our shared calendar, the credit card statements that came to my name. The math started talking. There was a pattern of cash withdrawals, small enough to miss one at a time, that clustered around every work trip. There were hotel charges she'd expensed to the business that didn't match any client address. There was a storage unit, an actual storage unit, that had been auto-paying $11 a month from our account for 4 years, and when I found the paperwork for it in the back of a drawer in her handwriting, I understood that my wife had a whole second shelf of her life that I paid rent on and had never seen. I didn't go to the unit. I'll tell you why later. And it matters. Let me show you what those 6 weeks actually looked like, because I ran the numbers makes it sound cleaner than it was. It was 6 weeks of living inside a lie while pretending I lived inside a marriage, and the pretending was the hardest engineering I've ever done. Take the Charleston message, the one on the counter that started it. I didn't confront it. I reconstructed it. I pulled the card statement for that month and found a restaurant charge in Charleston on a weekend Camille had told me she was in Savannah, staging a coastal listing for a client named the Abernathys. So I did the thing that felt insane and turned out to be exactly right. I looked up the Abernathy listing. It had sold 8 months earlier. There was no job. There'd been no job for the better part of a year. My wife had a fake client the way other people have a mistress. And in a sense, that's precisely what the Abernathys were, a name she wore when she needed to be somewhere I couldn't follow. One night, she almost caught me. I was at the desk at midnight, statements open, and I heard her on the stairs. I had maybe 4 seconds. I closed the laptop, opened the drawer, and by the time she came in, I was holding a utility bill like a man who couldn't sleep because of the water heater. "You're up late," she said, arms crossed in the doorway. "The heater's cycling wrong," I said. "I'll call somebody." She looked at me for a second too long, that wary alertness I'd later see in her sister's face at the dinner, and then she smiled and said, "My poor practical husband," and went back to bed. My poor practical husband. She had no idea she'd just walked in on the practical husband taking her whole life apart, one line item at a time. That's the part nobody warns you about, the loneliness of it. You're lying next to a person every night, and you know something that would end everything, and you can't say it yet because you're not sure, and being sure means finding more, and finding more means more nights of lying there knowing. For 6 weeks, I lived in a marriage of one. I'd watch her laugh on the phone with Rachel and feel 2 kinds of sick. One for me, one for Rachel, who was laughing back and being told she was crazy. And the whole time, the ticking thing underneath it, every day I didn't confront her was another day I got to keep my normal life, my kids' normal life, the yellow sun on the wall. So I was never just investigating. I was also stalling the end of the only home Josie had ever known, and I knew every day of stalling was borrowed. That's why it took 6 weeks and not 6 days. Not because the evidence was slow, because I was. Now the storage unit, and why I never opened it. Twice I drove there at night, sat in the lot with the engine off, the key in my pocket. She kept a spare taped inside that drawer, and I'd found it. Unit 118, back row, roll-up door. I could have been inside in 90 seconds. And I sat there both times and did not get out of the truck. Here's why. And it's the whole difference between the man I decided to be and the man this could have turned me into. I didn't need what was in that unit. I already had the folder, the folios, the fake client, the money. The unit would only tell me more about how much she'd wanted him, and there is a kind of knowing that doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you smaller. I promised my daughter's drawing I wouldn't become a man who went through his wife's hidden things in the dark looking for reasons to hurt more. Having proof of the betrayal was justice. Wallowing in the details of it was just a different room in the same sad house. I already paid rent on enough of her secrets. I wasn't going to move in, so I drove home. Both times. And both times, pulling into my own driveway at 1 in the morning, I felt something I hadn't expected, not weakness. Restraint has a spine. It turns out the strongest thing I did in those 6 weeks was the thing I chose not to do. There was one discovery in those weeks that hurt in a different place than the rest. And it wasn't about Paul. It was about Adrian. I'd pulled up a specific weekend from 2 years back, a sister's trip Camille had taken to Savannah, photos and all. Camille and Adrian grinning on a beach, tagged, dated, posted for everyone to see. Sweet. Except when I lined that weekend up against the card statements, There was a hotel 2 states away from Savannah on my card, the kind Camille always used, and a set of the beach photos with a timestamp that didn't match the flight she'd told me she was on. It took me a full night to understand what I was looking at. The beach photos were real. They were just taken on a different day, banked, and posted later as cover. My wife and her sister had staged a fake weekend the way Camille staged fake houses. Real furniture, wrong life. And Adrian had smiled in every photo, knowing exactly which day was the alibi and which day was the hotel. That's the one that made me put my head down on the desk for a minute. Not because it was the worst thing, because it meant it wasn't just Camille. It meant that at every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every Sunday dinner for years, there had been a second person at the table who knew, who looked at me carving or fixing the sink or reading to Josie, and who had decided that lying to my face was a form of family loyalty. The betrayal I could file under one person and one folder. The knowing. The number of ordinary faces at my own table that had been in on it. That was the part that made the house I lived in feel like a set. I didn't confront Adrian either. Same reason I didn't open the unit. I already knew. And knowing was the whole load I needed. Everything else was just weight I'd have carried for no reason but to feel it. Every night for those 6 weeks, I ran the numbers after she fell asleep, and every night the load path got clearer, and every night I lay next to her feeling the specific vertigo of holding a truth the other person doesn't know you're holding. She'd roll over and put her arm across my chest in her sleep, and I'd lie there awake, and I'd think about the word Rachel used in the kitchen, spiraling. Rachel wasn't spiraling. Rachel was the only other person in our whole social world who could feel the floor tilting and was being told by the person tilting it that she was crazy. I made a decision about Rachel around week 4. Whatever I found, I wasn't going to let her keep being gaslit alone. She deserved to know the ground was moving. I just had to be sure first. You don't take a wrecking ball to a woman's marriage on a hunch. By week 5, I'd stopped hoping I was wrong. By week 5, I was hoping only that whatever I found would stay above one line, that the affair, however deep, wouldn't reach my daughter. That Josie's birthday sitting in the middle of that timeline would turn out to be a coincidence my paranoid engineer's brain had invented at 2 a.m. That was the hope I carried into the morning of our anniversary. You already know it didn't hold. Now let me take you back to that dark parking lot, because that's where the real story starts. Not the leaving, but everything I had to do after. The nights after the dinner were the worst of it. Camille came home an hour behind me. I heard her key, heard her stop in the entry when she saw the guest room door closed and the couch made up. She didn't come to it. Smart. She spent that night doing what people like her do when they're caught. Not grieving, planning. I could hear it in the quality of the quiet. My wife was in the next room recalculating. The next morning, she tried the first version. Tears, but controlled ones. The useful kind. It was years ago, she said, standing in the kitchen where I was making Josie's toast, keeping my voice down out of habit, out of love for the kid upstairs who couldn't hear this. It ended a long time ago, Grant. It had nothing to do with us. It was the worst mistake of my life, and I have carried it every single day, and I chose you. I chose this every day since. You wrote that I was the life and he was the living, I said, not looking up from the bread. Year 4. She stopped. That's not... She started. That was a horrible thing to write. I don't even remember. You saved it. You saved all of it. You save everything that ever mattered to you. I cut the toast into triangles, so I think, somewhere, it still matters. Here's the thing about the days that followed, and it's the part I'd want you to take from all of this if you take nothing else. My asymmetric advantage was never rage. Camille was better at rage than me. Better at scenes, at spin, at making a room feel whatever she needed it to feel. If we'd fought the way she wanted to fight, loud and messy and about feelings, she'd have won. She always won those. So I didn't fight that way. She brought emotion. I brought paper. She brought "you're overreacting to something ancient." I brought a folder, a timeline, and a lawyer's phone number. She brought the performance. I brought the receipts and my silence. Every time she tried to make it a story about my coldness. Look at you. So calculated. This is why I... And she'd stop right before the end of that sentence. Every time. I just let the facts sit there being facts. That's the whole trick. If you're ever standing where I stood, you cannot outstorm a person who lives inside the storm. You beat them by being the one thing they can't manipulate, someone who already knows and isn't asking. I called Silas that first week, Silas Bennett, a friend from college, family lawyer now, the kind of man who says less than he knows. I laid it all out over coffee, flat, no drama. He listened, and at the end he said one thing that reorganized my spine. Grant, in this state, an affair barely moves the needle on the divorce itself. No fault. It won't get you the house or more custody just because it happened. He turned his cup. But you're not really asking me about the divorce. You're asking me about the kid, aren't you? I couldn't answer him. That was the answer. Get the test, he said gently. You'll spiral until you know. And whatever it says, you deal with the true thing, not the 2 a.m. thing. Okay? Get the test. 2 words that had been standing behind every other thought for a week. Because in the middle of that 4-year timeline, in the exact window, my daughter had been born. And the man in the hotel rooms was Paul Marlowe, and I had spent 5 years being Josie's father without ever once wondering if I was her father, and now I couldn't stop wondering. And the wondering was eating me alive. I want to tell you the honest, ugly shape of my fear, because I think some of you are carrying a version of it and pretending you're not. It was not that I'd love her less. I knew, the way I know load and stress and the weight a beam can carry, that there was no number a lab could give me that would make Josie less mine. I'd made her toast into triangles for 5 years. I'd held her the night she was born. She'd drawn me into her yellow sun family with a purple crayon. That was done. That was load-bearing. No test touches that. My fear was worse and smaller. My fear was that if she wasn't mine by blood, then Camille had known, had looked at me across 5 years of birthdays and toast and first steps, had let me love that child with my whole life, and had known she might be handing me another man's daughter and letting me thank her for it. That the deepest, truest thing I'd ever done, being Josie's dad, might be one more room in the house that my wife stood on to reach something else. That was the fear, not losing Josie. Learning that even my daughter had been part of the arrangement. I ordered the test on a Tuesday. Legal one, the kind that holds up because Silas said if it ever mattered in court, I'd want the chain of custody clean. Cheek swab, mine and Josie's. I did hers gently on a Saturday morning, made it a game, open like a hippo, and she laughed and had no idea her father was collecting the answer to the question that was ending his marriage. Sealed it, mailed it. 10 business days, they said. Maybe 14 days is a long time to make toast into triangles for a question mark. We were still under the same roof for part of that stretch. The guest room and the couch, a marriage reduced to a hallway between us. And the hardest hours were the handoffs. Camille would take Josie to school some mornings. I'd get her others. One morning, we ended up in the driveway at the same time, both of us walking Josie to the 2 different cars, and for about 15 seconds we stood on either side of our own daughter buckling her backpack, saying the small true nothings you say. She has picture day Thursday. I know, I laid out the blue dress. Good, okay. 2 people who'd built a whole life and could now only safely discuss laundry over the head of the one thing we still agreed on. Josie waved at both of us out the window as Camille pulled away, delighted. Oblivious, loved from 2 directions and not yet told the directions were about to be different houses. I stood in the driveway a full minute after they were gone. Let me tell you what those 2 weeks were like, because that's where the story almost broke me, and I think the almost is the part worth hearing. The paternity fear did not stay in the daytime where I could manage it with math. It came for the small moments. One night that week, I was reading to Josie, her head on my arm, and she looked up at me in the lamplight and said, out of nowhere, the way kids do, "Grandma says I have your eyes." Diane had said it at some point, the way family says it, meaning nothing. Josie meant nothing by it either, but it went through me like a cold wire because it echoed something Camille used to say to people, easy and proud. "He has your eyes, you know." A sentence I'd never once questioned until the folder made me doubt the ground itself. And now, here was my daughter, half asleep, handing me back the exact phrase, and I lay there in the dark of her room with her breathing against my arm, not knowing yet if it was true, terrified of how much I needed it to be, and hating that a woman's betrayal had reached all the way into a bedtime story and put a question mark on my own child's face. I finished the book. My voice held. She fell asleep. I stayed until the sky went gray because I couldn't make myself put down something I wasn't sure I'd get to keep. That's the part of delayed betrayal nobody warns you about. It doesn't just steal your past. It reaches forward and puts its hands on the things you haven't even lived yet. A bedtime, a picture day, a sentence about a little girl's eyes, and it makes you afraid of your own home. Camille cycled through every version. When it was years ago didn't move me, she tried anger. I was punishing her. I was cold. I'd never really let her in. No wonder she'd looked elsewhere. That one she got about 4 words into before she saw my face and swallowed it, because even she knew that "no wonder I cheated" was not going to be the argument that saved her. When anger didn't work, she tried the kid. You'd really do this to Josie? Break up her home over a mistake I made half a decade ago? You're going to be the one who did that to her. And that one, I'll admit, found bone. Because I was terrified of exactly that. It was 3 a.m, fear wearing a daytime dress. But here's what I'd figured out by then, and it's the thing that let me keep my footing. Camille wasn't trying to save our marriage. She was trying to save her narrative. The story where she was the good wife who chose the good man, the story she'd toasted in front of 22 people. Losing me wasn't the thing she couldn't survive. Losing the story was. Every single thing she said in those 2 weeks was engineered to put the collapse on my side of the ledger, to make me the man who broke the family, so that whatever people found out later, the last thing they'd remember was that Grant left. Somewhere in the middle of those 2 weeks, I told my sister. Ren is 4 years older than me. She'd driven 3 hours the night Josie was born and cried in a hospital hallway, and never once, in 34 years, made her love for me feel like a favor she was doing. She's the only person in my life I've never had to be useful to. So when I finally couldn't carry it alone anymore, I drove to her place on a Sunday while Camille had Josie at the park, and I sat at her kitchen table, and I told her all of it, flat, the way I tell everything. The folder, the folios, Paul, the fake Abernathys, the test in the mail. She didn't say, "I'm so sorry." She didn't do the face. She got up, put the kettle on, sat back down, took my hand across the table and said, "Okay, tell me what you need, and I'll do it. Do you need me to take Josie any weekends? Do you need money? Do you need me to drive up and just be in the house so you're not doing this alone at night?" And that was the thing that cracked me. Not the betrayal. The opposite of it. I'd spent 6 weeks being the strong, quiet, load-bearing wall for everybody, and my sister just walked over and offered to hold some of the weight without being asked, without a ledger, without needing anything back. I put my head down on her kitchen table like I was 11, and I let go for about a minute. First time since the parking lot. When I came up, she said the thing I've thought about every day since. You've spent your whole life thinking the best you could get was to be relied on. I watched you do it. You picked a woman who needed you instead of a woman who wanted you, because needed felt safer, because you could earn needed. She squeezed my hand. Josie doesn't need you, Grant. Not the way you mean. Josie's 5. She'd be fed and clothed at Camille's fine. Josie loves you. That's a different thing, and you've never once let yourself have it. What if the test, I started, then she still loves you, and you still love her, and the paper goes in a drawer, Ren said. You know that already? You just need somebody who isn't inside it to say it out loud. I stayed for dinner. She let Josie sleep over the following weekend, and I slept 8 hours for the first time in 2 months. And I woke up in my half-empty house knowing that whatever the envelope said, there was already a floor under me I hadn't built and couldn't lose. Some of you have a Ren. Call her. Some of you are the Ren for somebody. Pick up when they call this month. You have no idea which Sunday is the one that keeps them standing. I know this is heavy. If you've made it this far with me, thank you. Genuinely, take a breath. Now, the 2 weeks. Because it wasn't just me and Camille in a quiet war. There was still Rachel. And I'd made a promise about Rachel. But before Rachel called, I nearly lost the whole thing. I need to tell you about the 3 days I thought she'd won, because I'd hate for you to think this went clean and straight to justice. It didn't. There was a stretch right in the middle where I was sure I'd miscalculated everything. Camille recovered faster than I did. By the 3rd day, she'd stopped crying in the kitchen and started working the phones. And my wife on the phones was the most dangerous force I've ever watched operate. She didn't deny the affair. She was too smart for that. Once she knew I had records, she reframed it. She got to our friends first, one by one, with a version so well built I almost admired it. In her story, yes, she'd made a terrible mistake years ago when the marriage was in a hard place. But the real problem, the current problem, was Grant. Grant had spent weeks secretly going through her private accounts, her messages, her business. Grant had been obsessive, cold, keeping a file on her like a case. Grant had humiliated her in front of both families at their own anniversary instead of talking to her like a husband. And Grant, she told them, voice breaking in exactly the right place, was now trying to take Josie away from her mother over something that happened half a decade ago. And here's the thing that put me on the floor. It worked. On some of them, it worked. I felt it happen. A couple we'd vacationed with, the ones from the sprinkler barbecue, went quiet on me. A text I sent went unanswered for 2 days, then came back cool and short. Another friend called just to check in and spent the whole call gently suggesting I consider counseling before doing anything drastic. And I realized halfway through that Camille had gotten there first and I was being managed. The room I thought I'd walked out of with my dignity. It was quietly closing behind me, and the story sealing the door was that I was the unstable one. Then Silas called and made it worse before it got better. I have to be straight with you, he said. The affair on its own, legally, I told you, it barely registers here. But if she builds a picture of you as someone who invaded her privacy, who's cold and controlling, who blew up the family in public, that's not nothing in a custody conversation. Judges care about the parent who keeps things stable for the kid. Right now, she's telling a story where she's the one who wants stability and you're the one who lit the match. A pause. You didn't do anything wrong, Grant. But wrong and how it looks are two different buildings, and she's very, very good at how it looks. That was the lowest I got. Lower than the folder, lower than the parking lot. Because the folder only cost me a marriage, I'd already lost that morning without knowing it. This threatened the one thing I'd promised the yellow sun I'd protect. I stood outside Josie's door that night, always the doorway, and for the first time I let myself think the sentence all the way through. I could do everything right, stay calm, keep my hands clean, and still watch her turn my own decency into the reason I lose my daughter half the time to a house built on lies. I didn't sleep. I sat on the hallway floor with my back against Josie's door so I could hear her breathe. And I did the math for the 100th time. And for once, the math didn't comfort me because you can't put a number on a room deciding you're the villain. Around 3 a.m., I said out loud, to nobody, to the dark, I don't know if I can win this being the quiet one. That was the crack. That was the closest I came to becoming the loud, ugly version of myself she needed me to be so she could finally be right about me. I didn't. I don't fully know why. Partly Ren's voice, partly the drawing, partly some stubborn engineer's faith that a lie, however well staged, is still carrying a load it wasn't built for, and you just have to wait for the right stress to find the crack. I waited. For 3 days I looked like I was losing, and I let it look that way. And I said nothing, and I gathered nothing new, and I trusted, for the first time in this whole story, I actually trusted, that the truth was heavier than her staging, and would eventually come down on its own. On the 9th day, the phone rang. It was Rachel. 9 days after the dinner, Rachel called me. Not Camille, me. She'd figured out enough. At the dinner, she'd watched Paul set his glass down like it weighed 40 pounds, watched him not meet anyone's eyes for the rest of the night, watched my 7 words land on her husband's face. Rachel Marlowe was nobody's fool. She'd spent months being told she was spiraling, and now her best friend's marriage had detonated over a folder, and her husband had gone pale at a word. "Grant," she said, and her voice was doing the thing mine had done in the parking lot. "I need you to tell me the truth, because everyone in my life has been lying to me for what I'm starting to think is years, and you're the only person I can think of who might just say it." I sat down on my back step. This was the moment I'd been building toward since week 4, the promise I'd made that I wouldn't let her keep being gaslit alone. I could have softened it. I didn't. "Rachel," I said, "it was Paul and Camille. For about 3 years, I found the records the morning of the anniversary. The sound she made I won't try to describe. There are some breaks you don't narrate. You just stay on the phone and let the person not be alone in them." She was quiet a long time. Then she said the thing that changed the whole ending. "Adrian knew," she said flat. "Didn't she?" All the girls' weekends. She covered for them. I think so, I said. She's my friend too, Rachel said. She looked me in the eye at my own kitchen table and told me I was imagining things. A long breath. Grant, I have things. Paul kept a card I don't have access to, but I do our accounts. And there are years of charges I've been not seeing because seeing them meant this. I can see them now. And there it was. Not my weapon. Hers. I hadn't gone looking for allies. I just refused to let a good woman drown alone. And it turned out the truth, once it's in the room, doesn't stay on one side of it. She came over 2 days later while Josie was at Camille's. We sat on my back step with coffee going cold. I seemed to spend the worst mornings of my life with coffee going cold. And she brought a folder too. Everybody in this story has a folder. Hers was her own accounts, printed out, years of them, the charges she'd trained herself not to see. I want to show you something, she said, and I need you to tell me I'm not crazy, because I've been told I'm crazy for so long I can't feel the difference anymore. She laid the pages between us. She'd highlighted them. Hotels on the same weekends my work trips had happened. A jewelry charge she'd found on Paul's card the same month Camille had shown up to a Christmas party in earrings she told me she'd bought herself. Restaurant charges in 3 cities. And when we put her highlighted pages next to what I'd found, they matched. Date for date, city for city. 2 people who'd each been living in a marriage of one, and neither of us had been crazy. We'd both been right, alone, for years. Rachel put her face in her hands. I asked her, she said. Grant, I asked her to her face, twice. And she held my hand and told me I was spiraling. She's godmother to your daughter. I'm godmother to yours. She looked up. How does a person do that? How do you hold someone's hand and lie with the whole rest of your body? I don't know, I said. And I didn't. I still don't, entirely. I think for people like them, the lie and the love live in different rooms and never have to meet. We sat there a long time. And here's what we decided on that back step, and it wasn't a plan. It was almost the opposite of a plan. We decided to stop lying for them. That's all. Not to blast it to the world, not to build a trap. Just, when someone asked either of us what happened, we would tell the truth, plainly, once, and let it travel however it traveled. For 3 years, the entire arrangement had run on 2 decent people staying quiet to protect their own kids and their own pride. We were the walls. We just decided to stop being load-bearing for a structure that had never been ours. You want to know the strongest thing 2 betrayed people can do? Not revenge. Revenge is loud and it puts you back in the story as a character they get to react to. We did something quieter and more total. We stepped out of the story entirely and let it fall under its own weight. Rachel and I didn't plot anything. I want to be clear about that because this isn't a story about 2 people building a trap. Neither of us wanted a spectacle. What we did was simpler and, I think, more devastating. We stopped protecting them. That's all. For years, the whole architecture of the affair had depended on the 2 betrayed spouses each staying silent, each managing it privately, each being told they were crazy. The second Rachel and I compared 2 honest ledgers on my back step. The structure that had held for 3 years lost the only thing keeping it up. Our silence. That was the load-bearing wall, and we just stepped back from it. I didn't have to expose Camille to the world. I'd learned by then that the asymmetric move wasn't a bigger scene than hers. It was the removal of the thing her whole life ran on, my participation in the cover-up, my smiling at Thanksgiving, my just coffee decency. The instant I stopped supplying that, the story she'd built could not stand because it had never been able to stand on its own weight. It stood on mine. Here's what actually happened, and none of it was a screaming match. Adrienne called Camille, panicking, because Rachel had called her and said 4 sentences and hung up. Diane, my mother-in-law, who'd toasted commitment at that dinner, got the truth from Rachel, too. Not from me. I never said a word to Diane. And the version of her daughter she'd spent a decade defending stopped being defensible. The couples in that backyard, the sprinkler friends, the whole warm social world Camille had curated like a staged house. It doesn't survive contact with, she did this to Rachel. Cheating on the quiet husband, people might have gossiped and moved on. Doing it with the husband of the best friend who trusted you most for 3 years with your own sister running interference. That isn't a story a community forgives. That's a story a community moves away from. Camille never lost the argument with me. I never gave her one to lose. She lost the room. All of them. The exact rooms she'd built her whole self to shine in. It didn't happen all at once. It happened one person at a time, over about 3 weeks. And I had a front row seat to every turn, because people kept showing up at my door once they knew. Meredith came first, the wife from the sprinkler couple, the one whose text had gone cool, who'd been managed by Camille's version before I ever got a word in. She knocked on my door on a Tuesday, and when I opened it, she was already halfway to crying. "I said things about you," she said, "to people." I believed her, Grant. She told me you'd been going through her phone like a... She stopped. Rachel told me the rest. About Paul, about the 3 years, about Adrian covering. She pressed her hand flat against her own chest. "I have a daughter Josie's age. If someone had done to me what... I'm so sorry. I owe you an apology in front of the same people I said it to, and you'll have it." And she meant it. And she did it. One person turning, and with her turned the couple, and with that couple a whole corner of the room I thought had sealed shut behind me. That's when I understood what was actually happening. I hadn't needed to win anyone. I'd needed to be the same steady thing I'd always been and wait for the truth to reach them, because the truth was doing the work I refused to do with my own mouth. Adrienne came next, and hers was uglier. My sister-in-law showed up unannounced on a Thursday, and she did not come to apologize. She came to manage me the way she'd managed Rachel for years. "You need to stop this," she said in my kitchen, not sitting down. "Whatever you think you're doing, telling people, you're destroying my sister. She made a mistake. You're being cruel." "I haven't told anyone anything," I said, which was true. "Rachel did. I told Rachel one thing, because she'd been lied to for 3 years by people who called it protecting her, including you." She flinched, but she didn't stop. "I did what family does." "You looked Rachel in the eye at her own kitchen table," I said, and told her she was imagining it, while you knew. "That's not what family does, Adrienne. That's what an accomplice does." I said it without heat. That's what undid her, I think. If I'd yelled, she'd have had something to push against. I just handed her the sentence, flat, and let her hold it. "You can go, and you can tell Camille I never once raised my voice about any of this. She'll understand why that's worse." She left. She didn't slam the door. There was nothing left in her to slam it with. Adrienne lost her best friend and her sister's marriage and a good chunk of the community that had once thought she was the fun, loyal Whitfield sister, all in the same month, and all because for 3 years she'd decided that a lie was the same as love. It isn't. She learned that the same way I did, just from the other side of it. Diane was the one that surprised me. My mother-in-law, who had never fully approved of me, who'd stood up at that dinner and toasted commitment, with a face like she was doing me a favor by letting her daughter stay. She called me about 2 weeks in. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, there was a long silence. And then she said, "I defended her for a decade. I told everyone she'd married beneath herself, and I meant you. And I want you to know I know that now." Another silence. "Rachel is a good girl. What Camille did to Rachel..." Her voice went somewhere I'd never heard it go. "I raised 2 daughters who both looked a good woman in the eye and lied. That's on me somewhere. But it isn't on you, Grant. It was never on you. You were the best thing that ever came into this family, and we treated you like the furniture." She hung up before I could answer, which was its own kind of mercy, because I didn't have an answer. The woman who'd spent 10 years making me feel like the reliable help had just told me I'd been the load-bearing wall the whole time and nobody had looked up. And Paul lost the most, exactly like I'd known standing in my kitchen the morning of the dinner. Rachel didn't do a quiet, no fault the way I did. Rachel had 3 years of being told she was crazy stored up, and she spent it. She kept the house. She kept the friends. All of them. Because a community that will move away from the woman who did it will move toward the woman it was done to. Paul moved into an apartment across town, alone. The man who'd carved my turkey and shaken my hand and called 10 years the whole ball game. He'd bet on the same thing Camille bet on, that the quiet, decent spouses would keep quiet to keep their families intact. 2 of us. He bet on 2 of us staying quiet forever. And the day we stopped, the whole 3-year structure he'd been living inside came down on his head, and not one board of it was mine. I never lifted a finger toward Paul. His own arrangement did it. Arrogance is a terrible load-bearing material. It holds right up until the day it doesn't. And her sister lost them right alongside her, which was its own kind of justice because Adrian had looked Rachel in the eye at a kitchen table and called the truth a delusion. There's a special silence that comes for the people who help hold up a lie. It came for Adrian. Diane stopped speaking to both her daughters for a while, not because I asked, because some things, once the room can see them, can't be unseen, and a mother has to live with which child she raised. Camille made one last play. I knew it was coming, because she was too smart not to try the only move she had left, and I'd braced for it. She asked me to sit down and talk, not fight, talk. She'd changed strategies again. The anger and the friend campaign had both failed, so she came back to the one thing that had worked on me for 10 years, warmth. She made coffee. She sat across from me at our own kitchen table, and she was, I'll give her this, magnificent. No tears this time. Calm, reasonable. The reasonable is what she's best at. I'm not going to insult you by pretending it wasn't real, she said. It was. It was the worst thing I've ever done, and I ended it years ago, and I have hated myself every day since. She turned her cup. My gesture. She'd learned it from me. But Grant, 10 years, a daughter, a whole life. Are we really going to throw all of it away over a version of me that doesn't exist anymore? People survive this. Better people than us stay and rebuild. For Josie. For Josie. There it was. And I want to tell you, it landed. Not because I believed her. Because I wanted to. Some tired part of me, the corner booth part, the part that had been so grateful to be chosen at 23, wanted to take the easy floor she was offering and lie back down on it and call it love one more time. That's the honest truth. The manipulation works because part of you volunteers. Here's the thing, I said when I could keep my voice level. You keep saying we'd be throwing away 10 years, but you didn't build 10 years with me. You built about 7, and then you built 3 with somebody else while I paid the mortgage on both. I'm not throwing anything away, Camille. I'm just finally getting an accurate count. Her jaw tightened. The warmth flickered. Just for a second, that empty switched-off look from the dinner. And then she made a choice I'll never forget, because it's the truest thing she ever showed me. She reached for the one thing she knew I couldn't stay calm about. You should think very carefully, she said quietly, about how a court's going to see a man who spent 6 weeks secretly building a file on his wife, about whether that looks stable. I'm her mother, Grant. Courts know what mothers are. There it was, the real Camille, under all of it. When love didn't work and reason didn't work, she picked up my daughter and held her between us like a shield. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to know that because it was the hardest thing I've ever not done. Everything in me stood up at once, but I'd learned by then that the instant I got loud, I'd hand her the unstable man she was describing, and I would not gift wrap my daughter for her. I already talked to a lawyer, I said. Weeks ago. Everything I did was legal. Our joint accounts, our shared calendar, my own credit statements. I never touched a thing that was only yours. That was why I never opened the storage unit. I told you it would matter. And here's the part you should think carefully about. I have never once in this entire thing tried to keep Josie from you. Not for a single day. I want her to have her mother. You're the one who just tried to use her as leverage at this table 30 seconds ago. I stood up. I'm going to remember you did that, not to use it, just so I never again mistake what you are for what you perform. She didn't have anything for that. For the first time in 10 years, my wife had run out of versions. I almost feel like I should say something kind about Camille here, and I've tried. In the interest of honesty, there was one moment, near the end, where I did see the person under the performance for real. She was sitting on the floor of our closet at midnight, not performing for anyone, holding one of Josie's baby shoes, and she was crying the kind of cry that has no audience and no strategy. And I believe, in that moment, she understood exactly what she'd done, and exactly what it had cost, all of it, for the first time. I stood in the doorway. I'm always in a doorway in this story. And I let her have that. I didn't comfort her, but I didn't take it from her either. That was as generous as I had left in me, and I think it was the right amount. It didn't change anything. It couldn't, but it was real, and I won't pretend it wasn't, because the truth is the whole point of everything I'm telling you. Now, the test. It came on a Thursday. 14 days almost to the hour. A plain envelope, the lab's name in the corner, and I stood in my kitchen holding it for a long time before I opened it, because for 2 weeks that envelope had been every possible future at once, and the second I opened it, it would only be one. Josie was at school. Camille was, I don't even remember where. The house was quiet. I put the envelope on the counter next to the toaster, and I looked at it, and I thought about the man in the corner booth who'd been so grateful to be chosen that he never once thought to check anything. And I thought about the man in the parking lot with his hands shaking on the wheel. And I thought about the yellow sun on my daughter's wall, 3 stick figures. My wall family. Whatever this says, I told myself, she is mine. The blood is a fact. The father is a decision. And I made it 5 years ago in a hospital, and every single morning since with a butter knife and a piece of bread. Then I opened it. I'm going to make you wait about 10 seconds for what it said, the way I made myself wait. And then I'm going to tell you the truth, because you've earned it, and so had I. She's mine. Probability of paternity, 99.99% grant, father, Josie. I have to tell you, I did not feel triumphant. I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there, back against the cabinet, and I cried the way Camille had cried in the closet. No audience, no strategy, just a man on a floor, letting something out that he'd been holding up for 6 weeks. Not because I'd been afraid she wasn't mine. I told you, that was never the fear. I cried because the last landmine in the whole field had just turned out to be a dud, and I could finally put my daughter down safely and let myself feel everything I hadn't had room to feel. My wife had betrayed me for 3 years with my friend's husband and let her sister lie to my face and toasted my trust in front of everyone I loved. I'm so bitter. I'm so tired. But she had not made my daughter part of the deal. Josie was just Josie, just mine, just the small one in the drawing holding both their hands, except now it would be one hand, mine. And I decided on that kitchen floor that the one hand would be enough, that I would be enough, that the thing I'd been most afraid of my whole life, being only useful, only relied on, only the floor people stood on, was a lie I'd been telling myself since I was a kid, because my daughter didn't rely on me. My daughter loved me. There's a difference. And I'd been too afraid to feel it until I was sitting on a linoleum floor with a lab report in my hand. That was the wound, finally, closing. Not the divorce. Not the room turning on Camille. This. A 5-year-old who'd have crawled across broken glass to show me a drawing. And a father who finally let himself believe he was crossed a room for, after all. If you've ever sat on a floor and cried because something you loved turned out to still be yours, I see you. If this story has touched a nerve you thought had gone quiet, that's not weakness. That's the nerve telling you it still matters. Sit with it a second before I take you to the end. The divorce itself was almost boring, which is exactly how Silas said it would go and exactly how I wanted it. No fault. We split what we'd built. She kept the staging business. I kept my job, and it turned out the better half of the friends, though I never asked for them and don't think of it as winning. You don't win a divorce. You just get to decide who you're going to be on the other side of it. Custody we settled without a fight because Camille, whatever else she is not a monster about Josie, and because a fight over the kid was the one place I would have stopped being calm, and she knew it. 50-50 more or less. The hardest conversation of the whole thing wasn't with Camille or the lawyer or Rachel. It was with a 5-year-old on the floor of her bedroom under the yellow sun. We'd agreed to tell her together, and then Camille got called away. And it fell to me, which is somehow how these things always go. I sat down on Josie's rug with the stick figure drawing over both our heads, and I did the thing every parenting book says, and no book actually teaches you how to survive. I kept it simple. I kept it not about Camille. I kept my own face from doing what it wanted to do. You know how you have a room here and you sleep in your bed, I said. Pretty soon you're going to have 2 beds. One at Daddy's new house and one at Mommy's. 2 rooms. 2 of everything. And you get both of us. All the time, just not in the same house. She thought about it the way 5-year-olds think. Seriously, with her whole forehead. Do I get 2 nightlights? You get 2 nightlights. Does the toast come to both? And that's the one that got me. That's the one where the calm nearly went. Because of all the things she could have worried about losing, my daughter wanted to know if the small ritual survived the earthquake. The toast comes to both, I told her, and my voice only broke a little, and she didn't notice because she'd already decided 2 nightlights and guaranteed toast made this a survivable deal. And she went back to her crayons. I sat on that rug a while after she'd moved on. She's fine is the thing I need you to hear. Kids are fine when the adults do the not fine part somewhere they can't see it. That was the job I'd given myself in the doorway the morning of the folder, and it turned out to be the only job that ever really mattered. There was one more thing I learned, months later, and I'll tell you because this story keeps turning over cards even at the end. When we inventoried assets for the divorce, the storage unit finally came into the light. Unit 118, the one I'd sat outside twice and never opened. Silas handled it, by the book, with Camille's lawyer present, so I never had to be the man rummaging in the dark I'd promised Josie I wouldn't become. Most of it was what you'd expect. Things from Paul, things from a life I'd paid $11 a month to store and never seen. But in the back, in a taped box, were my father's tools. My dad died the year before Josie was born. He was a carpenter. That's where the hands come from, where the whole make sure nothing falls down thing comes from. When we moved into the brick colonial, his tools went missing. Camille said they'd been lost by the movers. I mourned those tools. I'd stood in an empty garage and grieved my father twice, once for him and once for the last things his hands had held. She'd hidden them during a fight years back. She'd taken the one thing she knew would hurt me most and boxed it up and let me believe strangers had lost it, and then she'd paid to keep it in the dark next to her secrets, and she'd watched me grieve and said nothing. That's the one that told me who she'd really been in the small rooms, not just the big betrayal, but the tiny daily one, the casual cruelty of letting a man mourn something you're keeping in a box across town. I got my father's tools back. I have them in my garage now, in my new house, cleaned and hung on a pegboard where Josie can reach the light ones. She helps me build things on the weekends I have her. Last month, we built a bird feeder that leans about 4 degrees off plumb, and I let it lean because an engineer who can't let one bird feeder be imperfect for his daughter learned nothing from any of this. Josie has 2 homes now, and a mother who loves her, and a father who makes toast into triangles at one of them. The yellow sun drawing is on my refrigerator. She drew a new one a few months in at my place. 2 stick figures this time, a tall one and a small one, holding hands under the same yellow sun. My other family, it says. I framed it. I look at it every morning. Here's what I want to leave you with, because I've had 2 years now to figure out what this was actually about, and it wasn't about a folder. I spent my whole life believing that the most I could hope for was to be trusted, to be the safe one, the reliable one, the man who makes sure nothing falls down. And I built a marriage on being that. And I married a woman who needed exactly that, a floor to stand on. And for 10 years, I called it love because I couldn't imagine deserving the other kind. The one man who never doubted her. She meant it as the highest compliment. It was the saddest thing anyone's ever said about me. Because a man who never doubts isn't loving. He's just not looking. And the day I finally looked, the day I stopped being decent enough to not go looking, was the day I stopped being useful and started being free. If you're the safe one in your own life right now, the reliable one, the one everybody trusts and nobody chooses, I need you to hear the one thing I learned on that kitchen floor. Being trusted is not the same as being loved, and a person who counts on you never to look at them closely is not counting on your love. They're counting on your fear. Look, even when it costs you the whole beautiful slideshow, especially then, I still make toast into triangles every morning I have her. The knife, the bread, the same 4 cuts. Some rituals you keep not because of who you did them for, but because of who you became doing them. My daughter is 5, going on 6. She thinks her dad is a man who makes sure nothing falls down. She's right. I just had to learn that sometimes the thing you keep from falling is yourself. That's my story. 10 years of trust, 1 gray folder, and a floor that finally held. If it reached someone tonight who needed to hear that being the safe one is not the same as being loved, then it did its job, and so did you, for listening. Take care of yourselves, and if there's a folder somewhere in your own house you've been too decent to open, that's between you and the truth. I hope you're braver than I was for 6 weeks. It's lighter on the other side. I promise.